program is brought to you in association with First National Bank of Botswana.
FNB, how can we help you?
Good evening and welcome to First Issues. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. On tonight's episode, we continue our conversation with Chief Economist at the World Bank, Dr. Albert Zeufack, who joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Our conversation centered around the projected impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the various African economies.
What role does the World Bank see itself playing in assisting Africa, if any at all?
The adverse shock that we have just been discussing will aggravate an already difficult situation in most of our countries. But at the same time, the measures that countries are taking to enforce social distancing in order to slow the spread of the COVID will also threaten the livelihood of vulnerable groups precisely. So what the World Bank is adopting is a three-pronged strategy. Yeah. We are working with countries to protect lives through all the health sector programs and emergency measures that we are supporting. The second prong is to protect livelihood, which is supporting the activity of the poor, but also those in the informal sectors, to make sure we don't come to a sudden stop in economic activity across Africa. So we're working with governments to implement social protection programs such as cash transfers and other protective measures that would allow populations to continue to consume to keep the economy running. And the third pillar of our approach is to protect the future, which is clearly that we need, even in this emergency situation, to be thinking of the future. We need to be conscious that this is not the end of the world. We need to be conscious that Africa will survive COVID. And in our response, we need to be building elements of resilience so that tomorrow we can actually recover faster. So that's the strategy we've been implementing and working with countries across Africa. The World Bank is stepping up with financing. We have availed $160 billion for emergency programs across the world. We're working with African countries to implement those health programs, but also creating the fiscal space with our emergency policy lending programs and working with countries to ensure that we mobilize the international community. Because one of the most important aspects of this crisis is no country will be able to face it alone. And the World Bank has been advocating the debt standstill, which means a debt moratorium for African countries to avail those resources to fight the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are not only availing resources, we are advising countries on how to approach this, but we are also advocating globally for a global solution, because this is a global crisis that requires a global response.
It is an open secret that Africa relies heavily on the help and assistance of international countries. So at the time when everyone in every country, every continent is grappling with the effects of COVID-19, where then can Africa look for assistance to get herself out of this recession? And at what cost would that come at?
It's going to be difficult for any single country to deal with this crisis alone. We need each other. And it's not only the international community. One thing our result has shown is that the lack of cooperation among African countries will make the crisis more severe. So it's important for African countries to think of a collective response to this crisis. And one of the things that is extremely important is making sure that the food supply chain within countries, but also across countries, are not disturbed. It's important to allow trade, and especially trade of food, to continue, to avoid a potential food crisis that would come on top of the economic crisis and on top of the health crisis. So cooperation within Africa is going to be essential. So we actually project that if African countries do not cooperate, the loss in household welfare could be 14%. If they actually cooperate, it would be way lower than that. It could be 7%. So it's important to cooperate. Now, we also need the international community. And as the World Bank has created, for example, a $14 billion fast-track facility to help countries respond to the crisis. So we have already approved a first wave of 25 projects providing grants, credit, and loans of around $2 billion to assist countries, of which 10 African countries, to really react to this crisis. But where will the rest of the funding come from? This is not going to be enough for sure. Where will the rest of the funding come from? The first thing is Africa needs a debt moratorium. If in 2018, for example, Africa paid $37 billion just in interest and in debt service, interest and principal for its debt service. So just imagine if Africa could avail those $37 billion, for the response. That would be extremely important. The World Bank has been advocating this. It's called the debt standstill. Most bilateral are now agreeing to do this. We are also hoping that most commercial creditors, private creditors, can also agree to this debt standstill to avail those resources. But the third source of revenue for African countries to fight this COVID-19 would have to come from within. And here I see two areas. This is where the crisis becomes an opportunity. It's an opportunity to better manage our revenues, increase the efficiency of our spending so that we actually get some savings out of the existing revenue. We can take the crisis as an opportunity to improve transparency in the way we manage, but also to curb illicit flows of revenues that leave Africa, and that could be used to strengthen our health system, our education system, and equip our SMEs and help the workers in the informal sector. And last but not least, I think it would be important for countries to really start rethinking public expenditure allocation, right? Our health sectors are so fragile, and in most countries, they are all dependent on foreign financing. It is time for African countries to really build solid health systems. It is important, while we are restructuring our spending, to also think ahead and really protect the basic investment in human capital, but also in key infrastructure, especially the digital infrastructure.
When running a business means,
Where did I put that receipt?
we can help you with instant accounting, free software that does your bookkeeping for you. When running a business means,
Wait, what do you mean the container hasn't arrived?
we help protect your business from risk with Mohwebi Insurance. And when it means
How do we pay our staff that don't have bank accounts?
we help you make multiple payments directly to people's phones with e-wallet bulk send. At FNB, we're constantly innovating to help business owners at every stage of their journey.